Now, for more on Islamic finance and its global growth, I spoke to Hossein Askari, professor at George Washington University. I began by asking him about how the system emerged.
That you had a number of very rich oil exporting countries that had excess funds, and the wealthy people in these countries woke up and they said, oh, what are we going to do with our money? And they wanted to invest it in products that would be in compliance with Islamic teaching. And so that's where the demand arose. Then on the supply side, because this was available, what you had is that both Islamic banks developed in the Middle East, in Asia, in Malaysia, in Bahrain in the Middle East. And then also what you had was that some of the conventional banks like JP Chase, as an example, they then decided, they said, hey, we can make some money out of this. So they developed the same products and they sold it to Muslims on the market.
So you mentioned that you're seeing a lot more of this interest now from, as you said, banks like JP Chase. What about other global banks that are interested? Where are you seeing as potential areas for growth, like certain countries that perhaps are taking this on as something that they would want to offer their clients?
Well, the big growth part of Islamic finance has been what is called sukuk, which is akin to an Islamic bond, but whereby you've seen countries try to raise money using this. And what this Islamic bond is that the buyer of this bond will contribute the money, but then they also take the risk, because what they own, they don't just give the money and, like a conventional debt. It's got to be backed by an asset. So an Islamic bond has to be backed by an asset. So if that asset, just totally goes bankrupt, they take the risk. And those Islamic bonds, what are called sukuks, have become very, very popular. And that's been the most rapidly increasing part of Islamic finance. So it is basically an asset-linked bond as opposed to a debt, which is, the bank or whoever is basically taking the risk.
And this concept of managing risk is obviously something that's very central to this concept. So what do you think is the likelihood that Islamic financing will become as popular as its conventional peers?
The country that is doing the most in that arena is actually Malaysia. Malaysia has made a commitment to incorporate more and more Islamic finance in its basic financial structure. The other way that I think this could, in fact, balloon and become more important is that if we have another problem in the financial sector, like what we, in essence, experienced in 2007, 2008, then I think the world will wake up, because a lot of people have said that, in fact, what we need to do is to increase the capital of banks. But you see, if you increase the capital of banks little by little, eventually, when banks have to hold all of their money in capital, then you have Islamic banking, because basically in Islamic banking, that's what a bank does. It takes your money, not its own money, and lends it out. It takes your money and invests it for you.
Now, Hossein, I do want to ask, you did mention Malaysia. So what is it about their banking system, you think, that makes Islamic financing so attractive?
It's not necessarily their banking system. It's a commitment that they have made. The Central Bank of Malaysia has made a commitment that they would like to have increasingly more, basically, risk-sharing contracts. And the beauty of risk-sharing contracts is both parties have to assume some of the risk. If I may just explain to you a very, very important one that is, I think it's overdue that we should develop, is on student loans. When you take a bank that makes a loan to a student, that student, at least in the United States, has to pay the money back whether they get a job or whether they don't get a job. Now, in Islamic finance, it would be risk sharing. So when the bank lends money to a student to go to school, then that student can be expected to pay back depending on whether they get a job and what their salary would be.